You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome. We are extraordinarily fortunate today to have with us Fouad Butt. He is the VP and Head of Digital Strategy and Automation at OneAmerica, the large US insurance company that is now almost 147 years old. Fouad, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Shel. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I mean, it seems today that AI is on the top of everyone's lips. Everyone is trying to figure out, how do we transform the business with this? How do we create a strategy around this? How do we rethink our existing digital transformation efforts with artificial intelligence? Could you tell us a little bit about that relationship and what it is that you are doing?
Sure, happy to do so. I think just to kind of answer your first part of your question, from my perspective, AI is just another tool, another arrow in the quiver, if you will, for digital strategy and digital transformation. I think it's made a big impact. It's made a lot of waves. To some extent, I think people have gotten caught up in the fact that it's kind of consumable by kind of Joe average public, if you will. But if we think back, AI in itself has been around since probably the mid-50s and 60s in some way, shape, or form. I think the inflection point really is, I compare it to when Netscape first came on. The internet was there also since probably the 50s and 60s. However, when we put a browser on top of it is when it became consumable by kind of the average person on the street, if you will. And I look at kind of Gen AI as that kind of browser equivalent. Now that we've made it consumable by everyone, everyone's kind of interested in things. I compare to some folks the difference between Gen AI and blockchain. Blockchain is still very critical, very foundational, but it's not very consumable by the average person on the street. So it hasn't gotten the same amount of attention, if you will. So I think AI has kind of been there all along. I think it's actually the Gen AI that's kind of made it consumable by folks. It's made it visible by senior execs, by boards. Lots of senior folks have their kids, have their grandkids. You can download it onto your mobile phone and kind of do things with it immediately. So obviously the next logical question is, hey, how are we using this in our business? However, I think as in any tool, there's pros and cons. But again, I think at the end of the day, it's just a tool.
Absolutely. It feels like these technologies of every kind need some kind of killer consumer experience that makes it real for everybody. When it came to the internet, it was very much email in the browser. When it came to to generative AI, it really was ChatGPT. We'd had transformer networks for about 5 years by this point, but it's not until it's in the hands of folks that it becomes this sort of engrossing experience where you really understand what the or have an idea of and now a belief in what the technology can do that really kicks off an accelerated adoption of one of these technologies. But I do want to delve into what you were saying there about AI technologies having been around for a long while. When it comes to either AI or digital transformation or strategy, we're talking about terms that are very broad. And on one hand, that makes it very difficult to be precise around what it is that we're doing. And it can be a challenge. But on the other hand, it's also a strength of the term that we can be flexible, that we can start going after things where we don't exactly know specifically what it is that we're going to be doing there. We know there's an opportunity and we should go after it. So there seems to be pros and cons of the lack of specificity in the terms. On the one hand, it does give us a broader mandate to go after more use cases and to have leverage a broader set of tools. On the other hand, it can be difficult to get alignment around folks. But I'm curious your thoughts on whether or not the vagueness of these terms is doing us a disservice or actually one of its strengths, or both.
I think a little bit of both. I think Gen AI has really amped up the FOMO, the fear of missing out. So to your point, some of the use cases may be a little vague, but people definitely want to get started, definitely want to do something. Years ago, I used to use this term. It's the second definition of ROI, which is the risk of ignoring, right? So I think a lot of people are in that mode right now saying, hey, let's go do something. What it is, we'll figure out. I think there's benefit in that, in the fact that you need to develop the intellectual and the corporate muscles, so to speak. So how do you deal with AI? How do you deal with Gen AI and things like that? One thing we've done at OneAmerica is we've matured what we call a test and learn process, where we bring things in. We have a very safe harbor environment, kind of a clear DMZ where we have some data, but we bring these tools in and we test them and we kick the tires. And it's a take on kind of, although I don't like the term fail fast, it is an environment where we can bring things in, and even if it doesn't show any promise, at least we've learned something. At least we've learned, how do you deal with data? How do you make sure data stays within your four walls, or if it's going up in the cloud, how is it handled? So this concept of at least bring it in, play with it a little bit, and see what it can do. I think lack of familiarity is a big danger. There's this kind of theme out there where it's not AI that will succeed, but it's people that know how to use AI will always outperform people that do not know how to use AI. So I think that's the key. Get your hands dirty, develop some of the intellectual and the corporate muscles around it. And part of that, I think, also plays into organizational design, right? Where does AI sit? Does it sit in the data organization? Does it sit in digital? Does it sit in IT? Does it sit in privacy or compliance or somewhere else? I think there's lots of different models around that. And the last kind of topic that's very close and dear to my heart is this concept of human capital, right? And again, building up those muscles and those skill sets. In the past, when I used to work with core AI, not just Gen AI, but 5-7 years ago in cognitive and things like that, I used to call AI augmented intelligence, because you'll always have human in the loop, so to speak, on a lot of things, at least in our industry, right? We're not looking to put AI in a pure lights out environment. There are definitely industries out there that you could do that. But for us, it will always be kind of augmented intelligence. How do we make what our associates are doing today make their lives easier, or make the customer experience better, if you will?
Absolutely. I'm always saddened that that term isn't used more frequently. I used to draw the analogy between augmented intelligence and Iron Man. At the foundation of this, you've got a human. You've got the Robert Downey Jr., who is making the decisions around this, but he's enabled by a system which provides you insights that you wouldn't be able to gather on if relying just on pure humans, but also then, has the suit, has something which enables you to take action on a larger scale than you were able to do originally. And so the big opportunity, not just from a governance point of view and a control point of view, was just the fact that, well, it's faster, it's easier. You don't have to go in and learn how to create an entire end-to-end system. You can go in and leverage your existing processes and go in and augment them. You can go in and overcome the limitations of the technology with the things that us as humans have been doing all along. I mean, there still is a lot of people talking about human-centered design and things like that, but not enough people seem to be hitting on the, let's take our existing processes, our existing human-based processes, and look at how we can incrementally improve these with these new tools, versus going in and thinking that we should blow these things out. Now, obviously, presumably, you want to do both. It's just to have a portfolio of them and look at the different risk-reward profiles and things like that. But
Yeah, and definitely, impact to versus feasibility versus time to market are all important. But I think it comes back to, there's a lot of sensationalism around Gen AI. And I think where I like to ground people in my teams is, how can we use it? What does it mean for us? For instance, if we have a process today where our associates are spending some percentage of their time just paper pushing or document assembly, how can we offload that so that they can really do the intellectual kind of part of their jobs, if you will? So there's lots of those kinds of opportunities around, rather than, hey, we found AI, now let's go look for a problem for it to solve, if you will. And I think that's why it's very complementary for digital strategy and digital transformation, because we were already looking at how can we help increase efficiencies within the organization leveraging digital technologies. And I think Gen AI and AI in general is kind of very key there. But we just have to be careful as to, kind of, from a data perspective, from a decision-making perspective, from a learning perspective, how do you tune the systems? Those kinds of things, I think people forget. It's not just a solution you can drop in and here you go.
Indeed. On the one hand, I would think that this is an extraordinary boon to folks in the digital strategy and digital transformation space, in the sense that there's now so much more attention, willingness to invest, willingness to participate in the context of generative AI in particular. But on the other hand, it now warps the expectations around what it is, not just that you'd be able to achieve with it quickly, but also just where you should be applying and what kind of use cases to go after. I guess I'm curious, how do you guide the organization towards those best opportunities, the ones to get started on that can lead to a virtuous cycle that you can learn from and build on?
Yeah, I think we look at it kind of in three levels, right? The first one is the core, what I call administrivia. It's the day in, day out calendar management, meeting kind of agenda setting, those kinds of things that essentially have nothing to do with the domain that you happen to be in. So you could use it in a life insurance company, you could use it in a manufacturing environment, you could use it in a retail or CPG environment. So the kind of the administrivia side of it. Then there's kind of core business functions. What makes each industry different than each other? How can you use it there? And then lastly is just the wrapper of customer service, associate service, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, those kinds of things. So we look at it kind of in those three realms. To be honest, right now, the second one, the kind of core business function, is very protected, I'll say. So we have to be careful not to go there, especially in our industry. There's a lot of regulatory environment and regulations we need to be cognizant of and sensitive to. So right now, at least, we're looking at kind of the administrivia side of things. How can we make the day-to-day, how can we even release 3, 5, 7% of capacity that's kind of involved in some of those administrivia things? Make people's lives easier. And then it comes back to the earlier point we were discussing. It allows people to get their hands dirty and play with it and get a little bit more familiar with it. If we skip to the third one, customer service, a good thing there is there's some mature solutions coming out and that have been out already. If we kind of step away from Gen AI to kind of core AI, there's been mature solutions out there for 5-10 years, especially in the call center, contact center environments, those kinds of things. Chatbots, we've all dealt with them, pressing 0 n times to kind of get to a human, if you will. But even when you do get to a real person, they're being serviced quite often by AI-enabled context in the background to kind of help answer your question quicker. So I think right now our focus is on the administrivia side. Now, the interesting thing is we are also actively talking to our external partners. And what's happening is AI, and to maybe a lesser extent, Gen AI, is being infused under the hood, like I like to say. So we are robotics partner that we use for automation today is starting to build AI capabilities, and actually, I would say extend their existing AI capabilities into the product. So when we get it, it's already GA'd, it's ready for market release, it's been tested. So that's a really opportunistic way for us to leverage AI. Obviously, Microsoft Copilot is out there, but we're seeing many more partners infuse it natively into their solutions, which is kind of a good way for us to back into it, saying, hey, this is already approved in our domain. Now, the tactical side of how do we figure out what, when, how is what I affectionately like to call the cash register exercise, right? So I will go into a room, clean whiteboard, essentially put the cash register of the company right in the middle of the whiteboard and say, listen, we have essentially two missions. Number one, how do we ring that cash register more often? And secondly, when we ring it, how do we increase margin, if you will? So that's purely from a financial perspective. If you step back from a organization and culture perspective, we are here, from our perspective in our industry, to be here for our customers and policyholders and distributors on the long haul, if you will. Our average relationships can extend into 50, 60 years, right? So we are here to do the right thing. But at the end of it, if you look back and say, hey, if you want to talk to people, focus on the cash register for a moment, and then essentially draw opportunities or use cases to see how far removed are you? The famous 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, if you will. So opportunities that we have, some will be direct, that, hey, we could do this, we could increase throughput, we could increase revenue immediately, or there's other things that are 5, 6, 7 steps out. Now, that doesn't mean the furthest one out, that might be the easiest one to implement, right, and the most feasible and time to market. However, I think it's important for people to know what's that kind of ecosystem that we're working? What's the universe of opportunities that we have? And just because it's close to kind of the cash register doesn't necessarily mean, hey, that's the one to go after. But it does put people in a mindset to say, okay, how does the company run from that perspective? And what do we have to do from that environment? Now, keep in mind, part of that also is we have to be here for the long haul. We have to invest for decades, right? We're not investing for the short term. So that part of it has to be factored in as well. So the quality of business that we're doing, that we're writing. And then lastly, what we do is we put a wrapper of design thinking around it, right? This persona driven thinking of, let's put ourselves in the shoes of a policyholder. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of a HR benefits manager or a agent who's out there selling, or even an internal associate. Let's put ourselves into someone that's kind of an underwriter or manning the contact center phones. Taking the financial side of it, blending it with design thinking, persona-based things. But again, the one theme you'll pick up is it's kind of domain specific. We're not anchoring to, hey, it's AI. What can it do for us? It's how do we run the business now? How can some of these newer technologies help us?
Well, it sounds like there's also underlying all of this is a focus on risk management. So when you were describing those three categories in the administrivia, one of this, again, this is very much augmentative. You're always enabling a human being. So usually the risk challenges are lower there. And when it comes to the customer service side, at least especially on the traditional speech analytics and call center use cases, again, you've got solutions that have been out there for 10, 20, even more years that have been going after these. Yes, there's potentially new things that you could do on the generative AI side, but you've got those traditional NLP methods and products that have been built around this that have been tried and tested and used for a long time. So it sounds like keeping that risk perspective is very important. And then it's sort of the traditional risk versus value. So there's a natural 2x2 there in terms of risk reward that you're looking at. But then what you added to this was also a sense of a journey. So not viewing this as static. It's eventually, as we progress through this, we're going to learn. So yes, some of these ones, we might not have chosen them for the reward side initially, but they might still be beneficial to do just because we will learn in the process of doing it. And that might open up some of these other use cases and change that effort calculation later.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thesis behind our kind of test and learn kind of process that we've launched and got a team running those things. I think the one additional dimension though I will throw out is demographics, right? So I joked earlier, I'm in the demographic that maybe I like to talk to someone, right? But the younger populations, they just want to self-serve at 3 a.m. in the morning and just want to do it themselves. So I think we have to balance that. It's kind of now not funneling everyone into a chatbot, but saying, hey, you have options. You want to self-service, do a chatbot, go for it, right? On your mobile device. You want to hit 0 and talk to someone in real time, give you that choice as well.
I'm always struck by how it seems to be that the key to leveraging any technology, but AI in particular, is to really understand people. So understand, obviously, internally, the people that you're working, your employees, your leadership, and your processes, but also understanding that externally. And it becomes, we tend to think very narrowly about that. Our particular customer is in a very particular way and has been static and has stayed that way for since time immemorial. And it feels like, well, these technologies give us the opportunity to go in and really both create this diversity of different experiences, but also to go in and understand that persona in a way that we haven't before. Previously, so much of that information was captured it wasn't captured at all, but it existed in unstructured data, in text communication, voice communication, our interactions with either salespeople or with folks in the call center, et cetera. And we had no way to really analyze that. And hopefully one of the benefits that we will see in generative AI models is them being used not just in a generative context, but also as a NLP on steroids, enabling us to go in and pull out those insights more. At least that's my hope.
Yeah. And I think in the past, what we've done is this concept of what gets measured gets done. So we were only measuring the channels that were available to us. So obviously your superset is limited just to those. Now, when you give people more choices, then you can start measuring, saying, well, what are people actually using, right? And it's not just customers and prospects. It's distributors, it's suppliers, it's internal associates. So as we're hiring new folks into the organization, they're expecting to work a certain way. So it's not just externally focused, but it's also inwardly focused. What are some of the internal workplace solutions, if you will, that we need to provide?
Yes, AI, in a very real sense, will hopefully make our jobs better. Certainly, if we use it correctly, it'll go in and minimize the things that we as people hate doing and automate those and let us focus on the things that actually are fulfilling as people. That's what we hope, but it won't do that automatically. It requires designing and implementing the good solutions that actually facilitate that, and that'll be a human choice, a leadership choice.
Yeah, I think the litmus test will be most of us, a lot of us go through the annual benefits enrollment and people are like, oh my God, how do I deal with this? And they look over, hey, Bob, hey, Susie, what are you selecting, right? And what did I select last year? And things like that. So I think those are some of the low hanging fruit where we can just put some bots against and look at things and say, hey, what's changed? What's going on? Those kinds of things from a kind of internal associate perspective. I've always found it amazing when that time of year comes, people are always asking each other, like, hey, what did you do? What's going on here?
Yes. Clearly, well, if you can find somebody who has made a similar choice, who is very reasonable and well informed, then it's logical to go in and piggyback on what that person has done.
Right.
But does not seem like the most efficient way of information dissemination and decision making. We've talked a little bit about the identifying these use cases, and we talked partially about on executing them, that to the extent that there are commercial solutions that are out there, why wouldn't you use them? Right? So there are co-pilots out there. So in terms of enabling, for example, developers to go in and program faster, why wouldn't you be leveraging those for software development? Similarly, why wouldn't you be leveraging the increasingly, hopefully mature solutions that are out there that are looking to improve enterprise content management and enterprise search? There's huge opportunity there. It's similar to a lot of other organizations, and also on the call center and on the chatbot side of things. There are the existing ones, existing technologies, but those vendors are also investing in those. But usually those are things that we should do, but they are, thinking back to my old boss, the Harvard Business School professor, Michael Porter, he would think of those as operational efficiency. He would say, well, those are things that are going to benefit everybody in addition to yourself. Everybody has an incentive to do those. They'll raise the bar, but they're not going to affect productivity in the long run because everybody else is going to be doing them as well. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. You should absolutely do them. You have to, and there might be short-term benefit. But what he would say is that that's different from strategy, and that strategy, in his view, was everything that you're doing that's different, serving different customers in a different fashion with a different value proposition. And then it becomes harder to go after those use cases with something that's off the shelf. I guess the rapid iteration that you're talking about, the test and learn, seems like an opportunity to go in and start going after those unique and core processes of the business and augmenting them as well. But obviously, riskier too. So maybe you don't want to go after those. Curious whether you're also building up your own internal capabilities to go after those.
Yeah, I would back up a second. So I would challenge the core, hey, everyone's doing it, so everyone's going to benefit. I don't think everyone's doing it, right? I think some of those basic things do become, and I think you said strategy, and I interpreted what you were saying as kind of what's your differentiation strategy, if you will. I would argue that even just upgrading your core mundane processes is of value, and you should. And I think everyone's at different levels of maturity. So I'll give you an example. So one thing we did a test and learn around was refactoring old COBOL code. And there's another kind of dimension of kind of a best practice that we're embracing, which is storyboarding out the process, right? So when we first started, we said, hey, let's refactor COBOL code, produce Java code out of it. That's great. But we slowly, again, come to our favorite whiteboard and like, well, let's whiteboard it out. And then when we storyboarded it out, we realized, okay, let's say you produced a Java code. How do you know it's still doing what the original code was doing, right? So we backed up a second. We said, wait a minute, there has to be a huge step in here that says, we need to first distill out all the business rules that were in that code. So looked at the existing documentation, but as some quite often 20, 30-year-old code tends to have a lot of business rules hard coded into it. So we use the AI engines and the Gen AI to kind of interrogate that code. Before we converted and refactored the code, we said the first major milestone is getting the business rules in there. And this is, again, back to the human in the loop. Just because we got the business rules out, we still need our associates to come in and look at those and say, yep, that makes sense. Because just because we distilled out business rules, we were not in a position to say, hey, from a business domain perspective, these are correct or even make sense or are using the right nomenclature. So we bring the associates back in, have them look at it, then continue. Then again, after you've refactored the code, you got to look at it again and say, is the end product, is the target doing essentially the same thing as the source was doing? So it kind of helps us break down some of those steps, if you will.
Well, there's a big point in there. I mean, it sounds like, well, if you can't validate something, then you can't or you shouldn't implement it. And when we think about validation, traditionally we're thinking about validation of a model, or we're thinking about testing. And here, that's not what we're referring to. We're talking about, is it making the right business decision? Is it doing what the business needs to do? And so you're not going to get that through just pure testing. You obviously need to test as well. And you're not going to get that through a data scientist evaluating the accuracy of the model. This kind of validation requires actually going in and understanding the business decision making. And so it sounds like you look at your use cases and make sure that you actually have a process of it's possible to know if you're doing it correctly, to test it, to validate it.
Yeah, and not only that, then the additional dimension or concept that we're championing is kind of we're leveraging, borrowing it, I will, from our kind of brethren in the manufacturing industry, which is the concept of digital twins, right? So you essentially build a digital version of your business. So let's go back to the COBOL code refactoring example. You got the business rules out of the source, you build a target, you get the business rules out of that, but that's still not ready for prime time. So you build a digital twin and say, I'm going to run it parallel to my normal business for a certain period of time and see, does it yield the same results? Especially that traditional 80-20 rule, right? 80% yes, but let's look at the exceptions. Does it throw off the exceptions? Does it flag the exceptions when you're supposed to flag them, right? Those kinds of things. So bringing together a lot of different components. But I think to come back to this kind of, we talked earlier about the FOMO or the risk of, ignoring kind of concept. The danger I see with Gen AI is the speed, right? So it's so fast. Like we could have gone and said, boom, let's go refactor the code. We could have gotten a partner that says, oh yeah, we'll do that for you, no problem. We could have quickly done something and got ourselves in trouble. So you really got to slow down a little bit and say, don't proceed at the speed of AI or the speed of Gen AI. You got to slow down and storyboard these things out. And always ask the question, what's the worst that could happen?
It's a little bit like power tools. It's sort of, well, power tools enable everybody to undertake carpentry projects that might not have been able to do them before, but they don't prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot with a nail gun or accidentally chopping off a finger. The need to go in and understand, design the solution and understand the best practices and have the end-to-end capabilities, not the capability of doing one specific task, none of that has gone away.
Yeah. And I think there's a danger of groupthink as well. So what we do in our teams is we will anoint at least one or two people, at least two, because one often feels isolated, but to be a contrarian. We say, you guys or gals take the opposite point of view and stress test these ideas and stress test what we're doing. So you can be the contrarian point of view to keep asking what's the worst that could happen. Because much better to have it on your own team and do it within kind of your safe harbor environment than to kind of release something and then find out, hey, there's something. Now, it doesn't mean you'll address everything, but I think it's healthy to have a part of the team that's looking at it and saying, hey, wait a minute, let's stress test some of these things. Let's pressure test these ideas and concepts while they're still kind of on the workbench, so to speak.
I think the peer review, it's not just best practice on the research side of things. I believe it's also best practice when it comes to safety and mission critical things. And this is the reason why, you give two people keys in the nuclear submarine, and both of them have to be present to do it. The importance of ensuring that this is being seen from different perspectives. And I think this is the reason why the White House executive order was so big on red teaming. And I'm worried about red teaming because it's so narrowly defined and it is very much focused on testing. But that broader concept of ensuring that this is validated, that this is part of a group effort, that that group is representative of either diverse perspectives. And review seems to be, I think, very important here. Not just on the testing side, but even on the, it sounds, ideation side.
Yeah, and I think we have to let people know because people do get frustrated because again, this concept of speed of AI is again a double-edged sword. So you have to be careful, right? And I think that's why this concept of test and learn, safe harbor, like fine, you want to go at it at speed of AI, do it in your lab environment and figure it out, right? But not necessarily when you kind of release for major consumption, if you will. And that's why it comes back to those three tiers we talked about in the use cases. If it's administrivia and you do something wrong in setting up an agenda for an offsite meeting, okay, that's controllable, right? But you don't want to do it in your core business process. That's where you have to be very careful. And you especially don't want to do it in kind of customer or associate facing kind of experiential components.
Often the challenge is that what you get to a successful proof of concept, a prototype, and we sort of know it works, but then there's no easy bridge to get it from there into production, at least usually when it comes to machine learning and quote unquote AI. And the problem often there is that there aren't very clear organizational structures that make it easy. Nobody is usually tasked with doing all of the different things that need to happen in order to operationalize one of these use cases. And so some teams go to the extreme. They then hire their own data scientists or developers and ops folks in order to then go and try and do the end-to-end. Most people don't want to do that, and it's a last resort, and try and coordinate different parts of the organization. But then that requires somebody who has that mandate to do it. And I think this is the reason why so many, or well, quite a few organizations are hiring a chief AI officer as being the person to drive that. But I've also seen it run out of groups that are doing strategy and digital transformation. I'm curious what you've seen work. What's your approach?
Well, I think this concept of chief AI officers only come onto the scene very recently, and I kind of started noting it. So it's kind of an interesting area. I mean, I'm still waiting to see what the real remit is, if you will. So we'll see. I think, but to your core point, we have to build those bridges to on-ramp the new tech, right? And what I've used in the past and I continue to use today is this. I model it on the technology transfer from academia to corporate, right? We know we have a lot of professors that do research, kind of the whole publish or perish kind of model, if you will. A lot of people in academia are also either consultants or part owners in companies and kind of have spin-offs and things like this. So there's always been this, how do you do that technology transfer from academia over to industry, if you will? And I think there's a lot of lessons learned there to say, how do you on-ramp stuff from a test and learn lab environment into your business as usual area. And this is where I come back to chief AI officers. People are so over indexing on the new stuff that they forget domain expertise is critical. It is absolutely critical. It reminds me of an example of my consulting days where one of the clients I was working for, we were looking over at their entire data strategy. They had hired top tier schools, data scientists, and things like that. The team was doing exceptional, exquisite work. But we sat down with the business folks, and the business folks acknowledged that, hey, this work is great, but it's not even in the top 10 of things that are important to me. So that disconnect between, hey, I got this new tool, and I think AI is very similar in today's environment. 10 years ago it was, big data and data science and things like this. So people hired folks, but they forgot that concept of the cash register. They forgot, how do we run this company, whether it's increased sales, decreased costs, et cetera. So we have to be careful. And I see a lot of those similarities popping up in AI. It's like, let's just get AI for AI's sake. But then you forget, what domain are you in? I think you have to keep that front and center. So having people that can balance, or I would say teams, because sometimes it's hard to find that chameleon that knows the business, that knows advanced technology and a couple other things. But having kind of multidisciplinary teams where you can have that deep data science, AI expertise, but then you also have deep domain expertise and you have some delivery experience. Because the other thing that falls apart in a lot of these examples that I've seen is the idea is great, but there isn't that delivery expertise to say, how do I on-ramp, exactly to your question, bring it into my business as usual? What will be the ripple effects? How do I do the impact analysis? And a core thing that's often overlooked till it's kind of too late, and then we play backup, which is kind of organizational change management. We have to factor that in. Culture is critical. As they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It does. So I think to play to the human capital side, to play to the culture of the organization is critical as well. And I think right now we have to be careful. A lot of people are throwing AI around without really balancing what does it mean, and how are people interpreting that.
I remember ages ago, McKinsey threw out the idea of analytics translators as folks who would be able to bridge that technology and business gap in the field of analytics. It feels to me as relevant now as ever before, and I see organizations creating AI or data or analytics product manager roles as a way of trying to have a frontline role that will tackle those. Because usually what happened was that, well, you had that analytics translator, and that was the team leader, the manager, an individual who happened to have a strong technology background, but who had been in the business for a long time, who could play that role, and they were just massively over leveraged. They had this giant span of control because we didn't have a mini version of that individual. You had your aligned data scientists, your data engineers, and others who then would all report into that individual, and that individual would have to do all of the change management, relationship management, project identification, and ongoing stakeholder engagement, and so on. I guess I'm curious to build out that capability. The issue I see with a lot of organizations is that if they haven't created that product manager role, they don't really have that role. They're repurposing something else. They're expecting the data scientist to be that role, or that the business will have its own product owners that will come in with this. I guess curious, is there something that you've seen that works?
Yes, I've seen it work, and I have kind of a strong opinion on this. I think we have to stop applying the age old kind of hierarchy model of a pyramid. So to your model, like, it's the person at the top, but the team is doing all the work, but the person at the top is doing all that coordination. I think we need to kind of take it from a pyramid maybe into more of a sphere or a circle, right? To say those multifunctional pods, everyone gets equal exposure. That pod goes as a team and hears everything, because you got to build up all of those folks, right, together. And it's a game of telephone, right? If one person hears it and is interacting, they come back, there's 3 to 5 degrees difference between what was said, and then there's another 3 or 5 degrees difference, and now you're kind of getting off target, if you will. This idea of pods, fusion teams, pick your term, if you will, that are on equal footing.
It almost sounds like Scrum teams. I mean, I was wondering whether or not, is this yet another area where maybe there's something that we can port over from the software development world?
I was trying so hard not to get into agile terminology.
Sorry.
No, because to me, it reminds me, and I'm dating myself 20 years ago, whatever, the concept of CMM level 5, where a lot of organizations were rated CMM level 5, but your projects were at CMM level 1. So I've yet to see a kind of high functioning kind of agile teams. People, it's more like Wagile, waterfall, agile, but I think there's nothing wrong with that. You make it what's appropriate for your circumstance. But yeah, so Scrum is fine, product owner is fine, but I guess my core point is just have a cross-functional team that works as a pod. Whatever term you want to use is fine by me, but not force it into this hierarchy where one person is interacting with the business and then coming and translating. Because the other thing, that forces people to kind of stay in their safe zone. That forces the deep data science folks not to come out of their area and learn more about the business. That keeps the business people content. Hey, I'm just doing the domain stuff. I'm not learning about tech. So I think just having that cross-functional component there and operating as one unit is what I've seen work.
Absolutely. I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk more broadly about AI strategy. People, I don't think, have yet really stepped back and really thought through what an AI strategy is. And part of what we've been discussing right now is that you probably shouldn't have an AI strategy per se. That's too divorced from the business need. But I'm curious your thoughts on what that would look like. Is an AI strategy a strategy for building up the capabilities and knowledge and learning in the organization? Is an AI strategy a roadmap of projected projects that the organization will take on this? Or again, should an AI strategy not exist and we really should just be purely thinking about more traditional business strategy and then think about where AI fits into it? Would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think I gravitate towards the latter description. To me, it's very similar to digital strategy. So what I tell people is, I was once asked, hey, what's your digital strategy? I said, well, what's the business strategy, right? To a certain extent, yes, there will always be things that you need to do independent of the business for a digital strategy or an AI strategy. But most of it, when you use the 80-20 kind of paradigm, it has to be driven by and in service of the business strategy, right? Because you can't just say, I'm independent now. 20% of it could be, yes, there are certain things I need to do, foundational things that need to happen. But I do think there's a little bit of danger in people going off because you know you have an IT strategy, you have a digital strategy, you have an AI strategy, and I think it doesn't make optimal use of kind of corporate resources. They have to be aligned. And I think what leads the way is what's your corporate strategy? And kind of very close second to that is if you have multiple lines of business, what are those lines of business strategies? Get the North Star on that, get your compass heading on that, and then let that dictate because otherwise there's thousands of use cases, even for AI. People say, hey, what are some AI use cases? There's literally thousands. But what is your business strategy? Where are you going? Because at best, you want to be in support of those. But if you're not paying attention to them, you can either kind of erode their effectiveness or actually counter them to a certain extent. So you have to be very careful.
It can suck the oxygen away from other things that you should be focusing on more. Then it'll take that effort, that willingness, and shift it away.
Right. And I think it also dilutes the opportunity to say why is digital and why is AI important to the business. Use the business language, right? Don't use your own language to say, hey, this is what we're doing and what have you. I'll use an example. Now, that doesn't mean you can't live on the AI side and the digital side and say what's going on in that space. A very current example I'll give you is this whole concept of LLMs and people creating their own and versus using a chat GPT or OpenAI or Lambda or some of the large ones. It's control of your data, right? And companies don't want to surrender control of their data. They don't even want, to the extent that it's kind of being infused into an AI model. So I think over the last few months, I think it's probably back in April, what have you, been kind of paying attention to this whole idea. I think Microsoft's out there with Phi 3 small language models. And I think it's extremely interesting where they've made the use case for standalone, disconnected. They can actually be on-prem. It can actually even be on your mobile device locally in a fully disconnected mode. And what really intrigues me is you can then tune it for your domain. So a small language model is much more appealing to me to say, hey, I can tune it to my domain. I don't need to surrender any of my data. It's not going anywhere. I have full control of it. It's on-prem. So from that perspective, we're bringing back some of those things to the business and saying, hey, now let's talk. There's some opportunities here. But it all gets driven because we understand our business. So we know what to look out for and what's relevant to us. But this concept of small language models is extremely intriguing. So looking forward to seeing where we end up with that.
Yes. As a former industry analyst, I've been surprised that it has taken this long for an ecosystem of these smaller models to specialized models to crop up. But certainly on the customer side, for us, we're both seeing a lot of organizations who are obviously heavily regulated or have very sensitive about their data have been pursuing this for quite a while. But also seeing this interesting trend of folks starting out with a giant generic third-party hosted model and then moving over towards a fine-tuned specialized model as they are getting more experience with the use case. And both it's often not just the data privacy considerations and data protection considerations. It's often also then the cost latency aspects of it that then come into bear.
Agreed. But the most interesting thing I find though, Shell, is the aspect of if I can run it independently in a fully disconnected model, right? And it's coming full circle. And I'll date myself again, is the model, the environment we're in right now, we are 30, 40 years ago, if you're the Wang dumb terminals. That's essentially how we're operating, right? Each computer is just basically a dumb terminal to a large language model. You have to upload it. That's why latency is an issue. And these small language models, if I can run it totally local with zero connection, that's what kind of intrigues me as well, is say, okay, I'm getting away now from that fully connected dumb terminal model and to say, hey, the machine itself can do everything locally, a kind of edge solution, if you will.
Yeah, well, there are plenty of potential benefits there. Whether it is, as we say, on the data protection, cost, latency, or also the potential to make it more accurate for your particular use case, your particular situation, because it is forced to learn the specifics of that. But early days.
Yeah, you mentioned cost earlier. That's huge, right?
It's early days and exciting times. Fuad, thank you so much for spending the time and sharing your thoughts and experiences on this. If folks want to find out more or get in touch with you, is a best way via LinkedIn?
Yeah, probably feel free to, if they just mention this podcast or your reference, that will be great. That will just help me position it.
Wonderful.
Thank you for having me. Shell, enjoyed the conversation. We'll look forward to any further dialogue.
Likewise. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.